I'm so pleased to welcome you today to our leadership series. This series was developed in response to the unprecedented challenges that the education sector is facing as a result of COVID-19 pandemic. We are all aware that the current events are having a profound effect on education, and this series has welcomed guests whose leadership, expertise, and vision are uniquely positioned to drive the sector forward. You will be able to submit questions throughout today's discussion and the webinar's question and answer feature. We will also include as many of your questions near the end of this discussion. For today's event, I am so delighted that we are going to be joined by HGSE alumnus, Geoffrey Canada, who is founder and president of the Harlem Children's Zone, a birth through college network of programs that today serves more than 13,000 low-income students and families in a 97-block area of central Harlem and New York City. The Harlem Children's Zone has attracted attention of the media and leaders around the world. In 2011, Time magazine named Jeff one of the world's most influential people, and in 2014, he was named one of the 50 greatest leaders by Fortune magazine. President Barack Obama created the Promised Neighborhoods Initiative to replicate the Harlem Children's Zone's model across the country. Jeff has been profiled extensively in the media, and he was featured in the documentary about the dire state of American education called Waiting for Superman, which we actually were able to hold a sneak preview of at GSE in 2010. He has received numerous honorary degrees, including from Harvard, Princeton, Columbia, Dartmouth, and the University of Pennsylvania. And in 2012, HGSE awarded him the HGSE Medal for Education Impact for his dedication to equity, innovative approach to serving all children, and leadership that has truly transformed the education sector through his decades really, of service to the field. So I'm so grateful that Mr. Jeff Canada is joining us today. And so I'm going to turn it over to him to share a few words before we start with our questions. Jeff?
Thank you, Dean. And let me say how excited I am to be part of this hour today. I'm looking at the introduction. It says Jeff Canada 75, and I'm counting the years. And I'm just like, my math must be wrong. This can't be like 45 years. So for those of you who are currently at the Ed School and those of you who have graduated, I want you to know that you can have a long career doing this work. And I am as proud as I can be to be an alum of the Harvard Graduate School of Education. So Dean, this is what's on my mind. This is our 20th anniversary of creating the Harlem Children's Zone. And it really grew through a series of understandings about education. First trying to find the silver bullet, then trying to find the 2 or 3 silver bullets, and then the 4 or 5 silver bullets, and suddenly deciding if you're poor, there are so many barriers you face that there is no one thing you can do that's going to level this playing field. And if we believe in this country and the Bill of Rights and what that Constitution says, then we have to do everything humanly possible to make sure that your success in life is not based on the zip code or your color or your sex, that we really have equal opportunity in this country. And so we ended up creating the Harlem Children's Zone, starting with kids at birth, staying with them to college. And in our own charter school, we've eliminated the achievement gap. Our kids are performing on grade level with white kids in New York State, New York City in math and ELA, very Common Core, very rigorous. So we wanted to prove it could be done. But that's, there's only a couple of thousand kids in our charter schools. Most of our children go to traditional public schools. And we have been obsessed with how do we take the knowledge we've learned and share it more broadly and more widely. And this is exactly what I decided I was going to dedicate the next part of my life to. And after 8 years of basically being in retirement, I came out of retirement to try and help communities around this country figure out how we work at a scale and in a comprehensive way, where it puts education at the center, but it surrounds these kids with all the other stuff we know kids need. Great health care, mental health, dental health, sports, arts, after school, summer, all the exposure that young people need to become complete human beings. And right as I was making plans to do this next part of my life, we got hit by this pandemic. And I'm going to tell you, in my 45 years, having graduated from the Ed School, we faced all kinds of challenges. We faced the homicides that led me to write Fist Stick Knife Gun. We faced the crack cocaine that decimated our communities after heroin, all of the challenges around policing and everything else. All of it pales in comparison to what children, poor children in particular, I mean, all children around this country, but poor children in particular, are facing now based on COVID-19. The fact that these kids have been sent home, that many of them are not receiving anything that we would consider to be a quality education. And you have the issues of trauma at a level in this country that we have never seen. And who's the most impacted? The very same kids that since Brown versus Board of Education, we have been trying to figure out how do we provide these kids with a set of ladders so they can climb their way out of poverty and enter into the middle and the upper middle classes in this country. And we are setting the groundwork for the next generation's inequality, social and economic, right now. And I think this is an emergency. I think this is break the glass right now, that those of us who care about education, we cannot let this thing slip back to where it was 15 years ago in these poor communities. And so, this is a particularly interesting time that I'm coming to speak with you all today. I am just at my wit's end that we've been spending all of this time in this country talking about the employment, which is important and critical. We're talking about the healthcare, but you know what we figured out in America? If kids aren't in school, parents can't go to work. But schools are not babysitters. They're preparing the next generation. And lots of our kids right now are not getting a quality education or anything close to it. And if you add on the summer melt that we typically worry about, and then add another 3 months to that, we've created a disaster. I think this is a challenging time to be an educator, but I think it's a time that we need the best and the brightest working on this problem in real time, right now, today, figuring out what we need to do to help our kids.
Well, thank you, Jeff, for getting us started. You're right. This is absolutely a crucial time when we need talent, we need great ideas, we need dedication. It's a really important time to be in education. So I wonder if you could continue a bit. You've alluded to it, and certainly this pandemic has really made visible longstanding inequities, ones that have always been with us, but now you come to light in different ways. Do you think this heightened visibility is going to change anything, or perhaps is there finally now the will to prioritize focusing on these gaps?
Well, so this is what I'm fearful of. We've recognized that the biggest impact that COVID-19 is going to have is on the livelihoods, the health, and the life of poor people of color. And suddenly everybody wants to go back to work, which that becomes the #1 issue in this country. And I'm thinking to myself, how come 5 weeks ago, when we thought everybody was getting sick, we shut down the whole country, and now all of a sudden that the data is clear who's getting sick, we're suddenly saying, look, everybody has to go back to work. I know we're gonna have an economic disaster. I'm not pretending that that's not important. What I'm saying is, we're talking about going back to work without doing anything to protect or prepare those folks who are most at risk. And if you listen to what the scientists are saying, what we should be doing, no state is doing it. All of a sudden, we've thrown all of that science out the window, and we're marching forward. And Dean, I worry that we're creating a situation 100 times worse than what we faced Remember, these same families who have seen all of the death, all of the sickness, they're the ones who are going to be out driving the buses and the trains, working in the restaurants. They're going to be the ones who are going to be getting sick. And their kids are traumatized because all of them know people who are sick and have died from this illness. So no, I don't think we're taking this issue seriously at all. I think we've certainly cataloged and talked about the fact that this has heightened all of the disparities in this country. But you show me one place that said, because of that, this. And I have not seen that happen. I mean, we're trying to do some stuff in the Harlem Children's Zone. We're trying to talk to Black communities around the country about strategies that we have to take to protect our children and families. But I have not seen the national interest, or even at the state level, the kind of interest it would take if we're going to really protect these children and these families.
So that certainly has us worried. But I think we do have a pretty good understanding of the problem. Something we definitely try to do at HGSE is not just worry about the problem, but let's think about what are some of the solutions. And I think there are probably many who are listening to us who want to help, who may have ideas to help. But I'm wondering about your idea. So what can we do about this? There's the academic, there's the emotional, there's other kinds of support. Starting just locally, what have you guys done within the Harlem Children's Zone during this time period?
So here's the first thing I would say to all of our alum and our current students. The science is actually being written even as we speak. I would not be surprised when we get off of this Zoom call that there's not another piece of scientific knowledge that we know about COVID. There are organizations right now all over the world who are trying to figure out how we can open schools, what we can do about schools. The science was clear to me, and we acted before the schools in New York City were ever closed. We realized that in the end we were going to have to close the schools. We surveyed every single one of our kids to figure out who needed devices, tablets, headphones, who needed hotspots because they had no connectivity, and how do we make sure that the day we close school, we have school up and running. So our schools start at 8 o'clock in the morning, the same way they used to start, with live instruction, and they end at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, just like they used to do with live instruction. And those kids are being taught all day by their teachers. They are getting gym, they're getting art. We're making sure that we give them as much of an education as we can. Now, look, it's not the same as having kids in the classroom. It is not. But we clearly know that it is better than just having an hour or two and then assuming kids on their own are going to be productive and use that time well. So one of the things is those of us who are doing this instruction, we need to begin to talk among ourselves and figure out what's best practice. None of us were trained to do this, right? So it's not like we suddenly had schools of ed saying, hey, one day, you're going to be teaching mostly remotely. So most of us right now are figuring this out, and we need to begin to share best practice on this right away. And we need to begin to say, we have to abandon some of our, I think, practices that may no longer be practical. What am I talking about? We've got to use the summer. I don't know how we're going to catch kids up if they're not getting additional instruction, which means we're going to make a choice for poor kids. You simply are going to get promoted without having the skills to actually be in the grade that you're in. And so that has all kinds of challenges. I understand that, but I think this is an emergency. And I'm sure there's going to be some educators going to be upset with me about saying this. But I watch those doctors and nurses go in every day, put their lives on the line because their profession demanded in this emergency, they had to do something that many of them were never trained to do. And you might have been a dermatologist, but guess what? You are now in the midst of a COVID ward trying to figure out what to do. I feel the same way about educators. Forget everything else. Forget it all. For the next 18 months, we have to see ourselves as first responders, which means we have to take extraordinary efforts not to let our kids slip back behind. We know what's coming. This is not like we're going to be surprised a year from now and say, oh, guess what? All the kids are now doing poorly. We know what's going to happen. We need to take action right now. And it has to be dramatic. And it means some of us are going to have to do things that we weren't planning to do if we're going to deal with this crisis. So those are some of the things right now. I think we're all looking around the world and around the country to try and figure out how can you open up schools safely. And it's very complicated. And, you know, I'm just looking at what they're doing in Germany and what they're doing in Hong Kong and trying to figure out who's actually figured this thing out so we can begin to share these best practices because we really have to, I think, let the science inform us. It's not like we're not going to make mistakes. We're still going to make mistakes. We are, but we can anticipate a lot of what's going to happen as we begin to open up schools. And right now we have to be putting those plans in place.
Okay. So one of the things I think that's great, and you really are relying on the science, you're looking at the science and the Harlem Children's Zone, like you said, looked at the writing on the wall and said, okay, we know we're going to have to make a change, and you threw yourselves into it. I'm curious, do you have advice for other schools, other school districts? You know, as I've talked to principals, teachers, nonprofits, I'm seeing just a tremendous amount of variation. There are wonderful stories of teachers, of principals really stepping up and giving their all to students and figuring it out. And then there are other examples where that's not quite the case. You know, given public health right now, it doesn't look like we're going to be opening schools in the short term. So what's your advice now to the principals, to the teachers, to the superintendents who might be listening, if they haven't still figured it out?
I mean, that's great. This is a time that I think we have to copy what the scientists and the doctors were doing. And this is the example I think we have to use as educators. COVID started, people started dying. We didn't really understand how COVID worked. And the answer was to put everybody on a ventilator. Well, the problem with putting everybody on a ventilator is that 80% of those folks end up dying. And then some folks figured out if you turn people on their stomachs, it's called proning, it actually saves lives. And you don't get the same level of death. Now we realize there's blood clots happening, you give people blood thinners. So over these sort of 2 to 3 months, you've seen scientists saying, okay, stop doing that, let's do this. Let's figure this out. Why? Because they're all sharing best practice. They're all posting stuff. They're like, oh, did you hear about this? Did you hear about that? We educators, that's what we have to do. This idea, solve it yourself. Figure it out on your own. You're smart, you do it. Yes, but find out what everybody else is doing, and somehow we need to start collecting this in an organized way. Understanding that it's not going to be perfect. A lot of things, you know, we're going to think is a good idea, then you're going to find out it's not. You're going to stagger some kids. Maybe that works, maybe that doesn't. But we need to begin right now as educators to realize this is uncharted territory. Yes, I want everybody thinking about this. I want everybody researching about this. But I want everybody calling other folks and saying, hey guys, what are you doing? Is it working? Let's be transparent about these efforts so that we don't get somebody sort of yelling that I've got a cure over here. And it's really just someone with the loudest voice, and there's no real data backing up what they're doing. So I think this is a time for us to be scientists. I mean, I just think we have to think of ourselves as educators that way. I really don't think we're gonna, lots of schools are gonna have trouble opening up in the fall. And if they open, lots of schools are gonna end up closing. And we've gotta say, we anticipate that, so what does that mean for us? With all of the other work we're doing, the biggest challenge on top of sort of using the technology and trying to get kids caught up is going to be the fact that these communities, all of us, not just the communities, all of us, we're all traumatized. Every time, I don't know about anybody else who is listening, but you know, every time I have a cough, I'm thinking, was that just a cough or was that more than that? I mean, you're so fearful. You're worried about your kids, you're worried about your families, you're worried about the kids that you're working with. And then if you are poor and you're worried about paying your rent and trying to keep your phone on and whether or not you're going to get food, that trauma we know has an impact on kids' ability to learn. And those of us who are educators are going to have to say to ourselves, we've got to make sure that we're providing the kind of counseling and mental health supports to help our children and families, because pretending that this is not going to be traumatic for them and it's not going to have an impact, to me, is a mistake. This is not an excuse. This is not an excuse for us to do quality academic work with our kids and do everything humanly possible to keep them on grade level, but it is recognizing that this epidemic has hit different communities in different ways, and some communities are absolutely devastated.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, and then we're really, it's become clear, you know, educators, it's not just the academics, it's all of the other supports that we provide. And a shout out to my son's own principal who said, you know, it's not just the content gaps, it's also the emotional gaps we're going to have to deal with as educators. I want to remind everyone, and thank you for joining us, remind you that you can submit your questions through the Q&A feature. There's a question that very much dovetails with one that I have myself, which is, you know, as educators, we do need communities of practice. I know this is something the Ed School has been trying to think how we can help with that. But what about our government bodies? Is there a role for state or federal policy that could help schools and educators do the types of things that they need to do?
So I'm glad you asked that question, because we, under different circumstances, we would have leadership coming in at the national level saying, let's call all of the top educators together and let's really try and figure this thing out. And let's try and create best practice and share it in a way that will inform all of us as we're trying to think this thing through. I don't see that now. Maybe it's coming. I haven't seen it yet. I think that can happen at the state level, and I think it can happen at the local level. And absent that, because I haven't seen it, absent that, I think some of us are just going to have to step into that position. But yes, let me tell you the biggest worry I have right now are the budgets. Every state right now is struggling with closing huge deficits with no revenue coming in for the last 3 months. And one of the biggest expenditures after usually criminal justice is education. And I think at the worst possible time, we're going to start seeing budget cuts come into our schools. So there's the federal response, absolutely. They should pass a new stimulus act. It should fully fund cities and states so that they don't have to do these draconian cuts in education, and we prepare this next generation. Because you and I both know what's going to happen. The richer schools, they're going to do what they need to do to make it even with the cuts. More parents will give, more wealthy folks will give. The poorest schools, they're going to be the ones who are going to be laying off key staff, shortening their school day, providing less support for young people in counseling and other ways that really matters right now. So I think there's a role in the federal and at the state level for leadership, and we need some folks to really step up and provide that leadership.
Okay. So Jeff, you've been a longtime advocate for education reform. And I'm wondering if you feel like with all of this change that's going on, all this possibility, do you think that this might be a time when we might actually implement some needed changes? Are there opportunities to move the education system in a more positive direction?
Well, I think there could be. And the could be on this is we recognize, I think, more clearly than ever before, the comprehensive nature of the challenges of being poor in this country. It is not one thing. It is all of these things wrapped up together. And, you know, I've spent the last 20 years saying, you know, everybody knows I'm a accountability person. I believe that you've got to test to get the information. You've got to prepare kids so they can pass whatever test they have to take. But I believe that in poor communities, you've got to provide these comprehensive supports, which are the health, the mental health, all of that stuff really matters. And to me, this is a time to scale that effort. This is a time to say, We're going to put education at the center, understanding that without that, you can't really deal with social and economic inequality in this country. But we just can't put all of this on schools. We've got to make sure that we have a comprehensive array of supports for children and families so that we provide the kinds of opportunities for these families to be successful. And so I think this is the time, when we could move that agenda forward. So, I don't want to get into politics, but one of the reasons that I was trying to work for Bloomberg was the Greenwood Initiative, which was $50 billion targeted to the poorest communities in this country to try and level that playing field. I think we need to do that. This is not, I'm not talking a couple of $100,000, I'm talking a massive reinvestment to try and make up for 400 years of inequality that has been built into this country. And yes, this could be a time when we say, let's do a major investment. Let's have real accountability. Let's have real results, but let's do real investments and put education at the center of that in a way that I think could be transformative. So that's what I'm going to be yelling and screaming about. I'm already yelling and screaming at Joel, so I apologize about that. That's what I'm going to be yelling and screaming about in this country right now. There's already been trillions of dollars that have been spent, and that is not going to change any of the outcomes in the communities we care about if we don't get some of this money targeted, in my opinion, in a better way.
Right. Right. So you just alluded to it. I mean, a hallmark of the Harlem Children's Zone model has been thinking about partnerships beyond just the schools themselves. And so what advice, for those who are looking out and saying, I really do need to think about wraparound services, what would you suggest? What would you prioritize if you were giving advice to, a principal, a leader, or even a teacher, a nonprofit, and some other area?
So, I mean, this is kind of back to the future. School-based health clinics, right? I mean, we're all talking about health and health disparities and why it's all there, but guess where it starts? It starts with young people getting quality health support. So going for annual checkups, going for annual cleanings for your teeth, that all of this becomes routine. So that's one thing we could do right away. The other is quality after school. The only way, it's not the reason, the only way we can drive our results is that our kids stay with us after school till 6 p.m., till 7 p.m. So we're doing additional work and support that's arts and sports, but it's also academic tutoring and those kinds of things. Every school in a poor community should be raising money, and I'm saying raising money because people aren't gonna just do it, raising money to bring quality. And when I say quality, I mean quality. People keep thinking our kids, yeah, let's get somebody who really is an English teacher, teach them math. No, let's get someone who's a math major, teach our kids math, so that you really have somebody who understands how to do that. But guess what? That costs more when you're going after quality, and our kids need it. So we need to be thinking about this. One of the things I will say to educators, when we entered this profession, we never thought we'd have to be development people at the same time. You thought that, I'm going to run schools, I'm going to do great education. Well, if you can't raise the additional dollars to support what we know needs to happen in our schools and in our after-school programs, it's going to be very hard for you to move that needle. So when you're thinking about building your team, somebody on that team has to know how to raise money. And be really good at it and have to bring those resources in so we can provide the kinds of additional wraparound supports, the health, the mental health, the after school supports. We're open all summer. We're providing supports for our kids, lots of fun and everything. But every day those kids are getting additional tutoring, additional support, learning new academic areas, which is half fun, half serious, so that we end up having a school year that's about 30% longer than anybody else when you do the after school, the weekend, the summertime. That's how we think you catch our kids up. And that's what I think educators need to be thinking about.
So I'm already starting to pull from some of the really great questions that the audience has submitted. So you just emphasized summer. So a couple of questions with that is, one, how are you continuing to reach your students? Because what so many schools have talked about is, students disappearing, never logging back on, and especially I can imagine this being challenging for the summer. So how do you approach this at Harlem Children's Zone, and what would you recommend, to other schools where the expectation isn't there, where, we're under new conditions?
Yeah. So, I mean, let's deal with high school first, because this has been one of the biggest challenges. They're thinking about closing down the summer youth employment program in New York City, which is just a disaster. Because the kids in the summertime, these kids, this is the one way they can earn a little extra money. It keeps kids from drifting into bad kinds of behaviors. And we're thinking about, what does virtual employment look like? I mean, I don't know. We're trying to figure it out. But we know we've got to be able to provide a way for our young people to earn, not give, to earn some money, so that this is part survival, and it's part for them not drifting into a feeling like I'm desperate and I have to do something to earn some dollars. So a lot of places would simply say, well, we don't have the money to do that. Well, we don't have the money, but we're trying to figure out what would it take, because we know if you're 17 years old and you're going to be home all summer, you're going to need to make some money. And if the city is cutting all of its jobs, I don't want you standing on that street corner, right, selling weed to somebody, thinking that's the only way I can make any money. So to me, when kids don't come to our programs, it's because we haven't thought of the right incentives. And that just means we didn't think hard enough about it. So we bring kids in for arts and sports and employment, and we add academics, but they don't come for the academic tutoring. That's not like a bunch of my kids saying, yeah, I just really want more algebra this summer. They're coming because this is a chance for them to write that newspaper, to be in that play, to be part of the Summer Olympics, to travel with part of the girls basketball team. These kinds of activities, which we know our kids want to do, are the draws that keep them connected to us. And I think that we just have to be very creative. And this is where this talent issue comes in, Dean. You need really talented people to attract young people when they could be home watching TV or playing video games, right? You've got to have something more powerful than that. And so if you get mediocre people, you're going to get mediocre results. I mentioned to you, Dean, that I taught martial arts for 35 years, and my kids worked with me all summer. They wouldn't miss a class for anything. It was because they felt like this was so important. I used to tell folks, a good youth development, I thought of myself as a good youth development martial arts instructor. I used to teach my kids all the bones in the body. They had to learn every bone and every muscle. And I don't care, starting at 5, we would go frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal, orbital. We would go through the whole thing because the kids thought, oh, he's teaching us that, so he's going to teach us how to break the bones. But no, I wasn't going to teach you how to break the bones. I just knew that would motivate them to learn. So when you have people who are magnets for kids, right? Kids want to do it. They want to do this. Then you can get them to say, you can't take this unless you do this class. And I need to talk to that instructor to make sure you're taking it seriously. And we do that a lot. And I just think we've got to collect that kind of talent. You have to pay for it. I'm getting back to money again, raising money, which I think is part of the answer, unless I can get successful and get a massive amount of funding to come into these communities where individuals wouldn't have to raise this kind of money. But until that happens, I think we all have to be thinking about what are the other levers we can push to make sure we can provide these kind of supports for our kids in the summertime.
Well, I would love to have you come over and work with my boys. It's getting to be a bit much, but let me push you a little bit, because with more resources, there's lots of wonderful things we'd love to do. But what are the things that we can do that don't necessarily involve money, that might actually involve mindset, might actually involve collaboration, partnership? What are some of those things that you've used successfully? Yeah,
so I think that one of the opportunities we have is to find like-minded folk who are interested in partnering with educators. There are a bunch of folks who are I love the true believers, right? We have folks who do teach squash in Harlem. And if you talk to them, they will tell you, Jeff, the academic answer to poor kids is squash. And they've got this whole sort of framework around it. And the kids believe it and they believe it. And they want a place to work with young people who are getting some of the quality needs met. We try to find folk like this. We find them with chess. We find them with squash. We find them with dance. And what we can provide is the space, and we can provide the young people, and we can provide the structure that allows them to do their job better. But you can't come into our sites if you're not doing quality work. And then that allows them to have the ability to raise their own money, saying, hey, I've got, 250 kids and I'm providing this service for, and the kids are doing X, Y, and Z. So I think, we always try and think of what's in it for the other person, right? When we start our charter schools, we wanted health clinics. So we gave the health clinic free space. You don't have to pay for anything. And they had to provide health support for our young people, right? So it cost us some space in the facility, but it's a great deal for them and it's a great deal for us. And we're constantly trying to figure out what are those kinds of opportunities we have to partner with quality folk. But you have to understand, I think, what they see as a win-win for them. Often we're thinking about a win for ourselves, but we're not thinking about a win for the other folks. So a lot of times people say, well, Jeff, would you appear with us? Can we, use your organization or your name when it comes to raising money? And the answer to that within reason is yes. We try to make sure that this is a partnership that works for both sides so that we think we're getting a quality, a partnership. We have a gymnast who used to, was an Olympic, she's an African-American gymnast, Wendy Hilliard. She's great. She teaches our kids stuff. And, when I saw it, I was like, I don't really know, but she was so terrific. I said, there's no way I'm gonna let this woman go work anywhere else. Let's give her the space to begin to teach our kids rhythmic gymnastics with the ribbons and all. I mean, it's just great stuff. So they're in Harlem. We have kids who are thinking about the Olympics because, we have this wonderful instructor. She needed a place. She needed an ability to go out and not have to worry about the overhead of raising money and paying the heat and keeping the lights on and all that kind of stuff. So we did a great trade. She's providing great services. We're doing a lot of the backbone information and backbone support for her. Those are the kinds of deals I think we should be making. And we should be actively looking for those kinds of opportunities. And it comes with costs. These are never easy things. There's always problems. There's always going to be somebody who didn't clean up, who didn't fix this. They left everything a mess. You walked in the next day. This is just par for the course. That can't be the reason that we decide this partnership is not working. Now, if no kids are there, and if no kids are having the kind of results that we care about, great. But we have to realize these things are always challenges whenever two organizations come together and use the same space.
Okay. Well, I definitely have some more questions coming up about what your advice is for fall. But before I get to those, you've alluded to several times, mistakes are going to be made. We have to try lots of different things. But, oftentimes we learn so much from our mistakes and we see all the success Harlem Children's Zone has had. But I wonder, would you share a bit about what over the years or even just most recently during the spring, what are some mistakes that you've made that, actually were valuable lessons that you would want to share with us?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest mistakes that we made was thinking that once our kids graduated school and went to college, it would be fine. And this is a place where I think always following the data. So the kids were graduating, it was great. We were waving goodbye, they were going to school. And 2 years later, we looked and saw the results and they were terrible. And we realized that we were then going to have to do more, that we're going to have to stay with these kids. We're going to have to try and support them through college. And that meant another 4 to 6 years. So I'm going back to the board saying, hey, I know I told you all it was over. It's not over. We need to do more. But I think that being open and transparent about this kind of stuff is really important. When Paul Tough wrote Whatever It Takes, I called him in the day that I was closing up, not starting my high school, because our middle school wasn't strong. This is like 15 years ago. And I had to tell the parents and the kids that I wasn't going to open up the high school after promising them if they stayed with us, they would go to high school with us. Worst professional day of my life. Well, I called Paul, who was at that time an editorial writer for the New York Times, to come in and witness this, because I said I did not want anybody to think you could do this work without making errors. Sometimes really bad errors, sometimes ones that really hurt you, that you're embarrassed, you're ashamed. And if people thought, oh yeah, I could see how this was just a straight line for success, they would miss the whole point of the Harlem Children's Zone, which is we tried some things did not work. We tried to correct them, sometimes that didn't work, and we kept trying and moving forward. And I just think that's part of this issue. You know, the tendency, because of, I think, funders and status, is to pretend you don't ever make mistakes. That you know, whatever happened, sweep it under the rug. Don't tell anybody about it. When they ask you how it went, say it was great. You know, it all worked out. That's a reflex action. Certainly it's in the zone as everywhere else. People don't like to come out and admit things, especially when you worked really hard, that they didn't work. But we've tried to create an organization that you're not punished for that. What you're punished for is hiding it, not being transparent, and not fixing it. That those are the things. But making the mistake out of hard effort and good work, we have a team of folk who come together and try and solve that problem. Now, I will tell you, I have to just be honest and transparent. When I get my senior team, when I was running the organization, I asked how everything was going. You know what they told me? Great. Right? I'm like, there's 15,000 kids. If you got 6 kids, it's not great. How can it be great with, because the natural reflex is for people to tell the boss everything's good, and trying to convince folks that I really was good at helping folks solve problems, but if I didn't know them, I couldn't solve them. That was not going to be a penalty, that they're going to think, oh, when I'm evaluated, Jeff is going to say, I didn't do this, I didn't do that. That is a very tough set of beliefs for us to get through in our field. And I hope that folks are having those kind of discussions, because this is a time, I think, where we can be very clear we're going to make mistakes. No one's ever done this before. But that should be part of, I think, our learning journey. Now, it's not like I'm encouraging you to hire a bunch of people who don't know what they're doing. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that you get really smart people, and if they're trying to solve a problem, some of what they're going to do is not going to work. And we need to be able to be transparent and say, look, I tried really hard, but the truth of the matter is I looked at the data, it's not working.
Okay, thank you. That's really great advice. So I think we must have some principals joining us, or aspiring principals. Put yourself in their shoes, looking ahead to this coming school year, current conditions, lots of uncertainty. What would be your top 2 to 3 priorities?
So I think that, so this is what I have, the most current thing I've heard about this virus, that the worst places in terms of infection are closed off spaces, filled with folks, doing a lot of talking, singing, yelling. And I was like, oh boy, that doesn't sound great for classrooms and schools, right? But that's where the infection, as they're starting to look at these micro droplets and how long they last in the air and all of those kind of things. So I think we're going with masks. I think we're going to have to say, since we recognize this is a problem, we're going to have to go with masks. So that's A. B, the social distancing issue is really difficult in schools. And so we're going to have to think scheduling. I mean, how is it that you can provide schools in a way that parents can go to work, but yet have all the kids coming to school at the same time? And I think there's going to have to be some work with employers to say, you can't be asking everybody to come to work at 9 o'clock, because that simply is not going to work, because some kids are going to have to come on a morning shift, some kids are going to have to come on an afternoon shift. The other thing that I think people are really looking at right now is air circulation. If you have windows, open those windows and get air flowing in, and tell kids they'll have to bring a sweater, we're going to keep these places with air moving because that seems to be fairly protective when it comes to that virus, those little micro droplets not just hanging in the air. So having lunch maybe inside classrooms instead of kids gathering all at the same place, trying to figure out if there are other places we can hold classes. I mean, I'm thinking of all of our after school sites and saying, can I have a class over here or a class over there so that if someone ends up getting infected, you don't have to shut down the whole school. You don't have to worry that maybe everybody got infected. It'll just be this group. They'll have to do 14 days. We'll do the sort of, remote instruction while that's going on instead of having to close the whole school down because you're worried that it's circulated throughout the whole school. Taking kids' temperatures is great. It's not a panacea. There's so much asymptomatic spread going on that you can't be sure just because someone doesn't have a temperature that they're not spreading the virus. And then we've got to protect our most vulnerable folks who have pre-existing conditions, people who are older and elderly. You don't want to expose them to COVID-19. And we've got to think about what are the roles they can play that's more protective so they don't run the same risk, I think, of people who are under 50 who are interacting more with kids. So those are just some of the things that are going on. Again, I'm looking at what's happening around the world to see whether or not folks, some folks have started the earlier kids early and said, but people are also thinking that in some of the older kids, it's less necessary for them to have the same amount of contact as some of the younger kids. I don't know if any of that is science right now. I think everybody's guessing. And we've just got to watch to see what happens. But I have a feeling that schools are going to have to open. And then I think if we really don't have the kind of testing or we don't have really good therapeutics, I think there's going to be a chance that the schools will end up closing again. And we're going to have to spend another couple of months pushing this thing down.
Yes, yeah, definitely concerns there, particularly for public health. But what about in terms of students and their learning? Because I think what's going to happen with a lot of schools, some students, they're still getting some instruction, their parents may be supplementing. Other students, it's going to be more like they've been basically out of school for 6 months. So what advice do you have to individual teachers, but also just schools, districts? How are they going to deal with all, learners coming in at all these different levels? And, is there a role for testing or what do you suggest?
So, I mean, this is certainly not a panacea, but I know there are a bunch of folk who are now looking at the kind of online learning instruction. I think we should assume what we taught kids in November, we're going to have to reteach them in September. But the question is, can that be done as homework? Can we have kids learning for an extra 2 hours after school in some way that we can collect the data and know that they actually did master that information or they didn't master that information? I absolutely think we're going to have to extend the school day. I think we're going to have to think about Saturday classes because a lot of this is going to be trying to catch kids up. And I suspect when kids come back to school, that it's going to take a while for them to emotionally be able to deal with, real challenging academic learning. So I would spend the first month of school trying to just go over what we assume kids have learned to see if we can make sure that how much did they forget? Because you don't want to go learn a whole bunch of stuff that's built on a foundation that simply is not there. And then kids end up having massive failure on top of everything else. But I also don't want us to think in our regular school day, we're going to be able to actually catch kids up and teach them this year's academics. So I think we've got to think about how do we recruit parents? How do we recruit volunteers? How do we go to the fraternities, sororities, and ask, can you guys help us with tutoring with kids? How do we try and figure out how we can provide smaller group instruction for kids who are behind while trying to work with a group of kids in large settings, all the time being worried about health, right? You bring strangers into your school, oh boy, then maybe they're sick. I mean, it's complicated, but I think we've got to start thinking about it right now. And I'm hoping this antibody testing will be more available and that is protective. And we don't have any insight into any one of those things. But if we know that you have 6 months that protection if you've been exposed, then I think you can just simply say those who've had antibodies, we feel like you're not going to be infectious and you can provide tutoring and other kinds of supports to kids on a regular basis. But so much of it is based on the health sciences right now. I think absent the health science, the only other tool we have is remote learning. And we should all be learning as much as humanly possible about what's working, what's exciting the kids, what's really not exciting at all, so we don't end up wasting a lot of time and money on stuff that doesn't work.
Okay, yes. Well, you brought up again partnerships and ways that we can help students, because a number of questions that we're receiving are about the teachers. So, you know, the teachers being so critical and mobilizing this force, but how do you contend with, you know, teachers unions have made different decisions, and then also just the basic fact, you know, so many of our teachers are also balancing homeschooling their own children and other kinds of needs. So how do we mobilize, and what is the role of teachers unions in this going forward?
Well, you know, this is an area that I think I and the teachers unions would be in many places in the same on number one, the issue of safety. We've got to make sure schools are safe, and I think that they have to be safe for students and they have to be safe for teachers. And right now, I don't feel like that's been taken seriously, right? I just don't think that people are really talking about how we're going to make sure safety is not job one for our faculty as well as our kids. The second thing is I think everybody is trying to figure out how do you reopen a school with all of these competing pressures. You got parents who need to go to work, right? You've got staff who themselves are traumatized, I think all of our teachers need to have additional mental health supports. I mean, this is not something that I think any of us are going to be left unscarred by. And suddenly you're walking back into a classroom, you're walking past lots of folks. You have to actually get to schools and get home from schools. I mean, this is really pretty complicated. And I think the facts and science are comforting, and then being clear about what we don't know so people realize what the risks are for real. But there has to be an intention that we're trying to protect you. We can't just think we're just going to sacrifice you. And folks, you go in there, but we haven't really thought this thing through. So my sense is that teachers all want to know, what do we do when kids are with us in terms of the classroom? And what do we do if we have to deal with kids remotely? Because teachers want to be effective. That's what they want to be. And I think one of the great sort of political mediators in this could be the teachers unions, that they can go out and insist, right, that we need to have very clear and agreed upon structures for both how we educate kids safely while they're with us and how we deal with them remotely, so that we know all kids in this country have access to technology, they have access to the devices, they have access to the internet, and they have things like headphones so that you can actually focus and concentrate. And then we have to assume that schools are open and they may have to close, because we're not going to risk the safety of folks. And there I think people say, okay, now at least I got it. I understand this is a measured risk. We're all going to be at risk, it's true, but it's measured. We know what's going to happen if I end up with 2 teachers end up being sick. We've got a plan. We know what that plan looks like, and transparency is key in all of this work. So I think all of us have to work together on this. And I see the teachers unions being part of the solution moving forward to how we deal with this crisis in our schools.
Okay, thank you. So I wonder, we've covered a number of different things during this conversation that have changed, whether it's the remote learning, push for collaboration, different roles of educators and teachers unions, thinking differently about the school day, the school year, and the use of technology being, very important part of this, and even thinking about how it can help fill gaps. I wonder, so let's fast forward 3 years. We're on the other side of this pandemic. Public health concerns are over, vaccine, we're good. what do you think are going to be some of the things that we'll continue to carry forward? Are we going to be changing the way that students receive information, or there's other things that we've tried, new ideas that you think might stick?
I don't see any way of us getting away from the opportunities that remote instruction can provide. No matter how mediocre it is right now, right? There is, I think, a real opportunity for us to think about our school day and our school year, where you could use remote instruction. If you can't do after school in other ways, could you use remote instruction to do it? You can't do summer in other ways, could you use remote instruction to do it? I just think that's one of those tools that we should never put back into sort of a place of saying, oh, that's just for those kids. We need to get better, it needs to get smarter, it needs to be more interactive, but I think that that could potentially be a solution. I think focusing on the whole child is something that I hope we never go back. Look, people know I'm a, accountability testing and all of that stuff. But I don't care what you did on your 3rd grade test. If you're going to be so traumatized, you're going to be so fearful, you're going to feel so insecure that you're not going to be able to live a productive life. And so we've got to find balance. There's a place for all of these kind of important educational objectives. And they have to be equalized. And I think one of the things that I'm hoping happens 3 years from now is that people will pay just as much attention to whether or not kids are getting high quality art, high quality sport, great health, great mental health, as to whether or not they're doing well on the SATs or passing a high stakes test. I think all of that goes together for real. And we've been much too much on one side of that equation. And to some degree, denigrating and undercutting the other side of that equation.
Yeah. Yes. Well, Jeff, this has been fantastic, but I before we close out, in exactly 2 weeks, we are going to have our commencement, and we are going to send off 715 amazing students from the Harvard Graduate School of Education, many of whom I hope were able to join today and who've been listening. And coming from all walks of life and going around the world just with that mission to improve education. What parting words of advice do you have for them?
And this is the first thing I'm going to say is take care of yourself, for real. You're not going to be effective and able to sort of go in and deal with the educational challenges we have if you're not healthy, emotionally and physically and spiritually. And I mean that in all seriousness. This work is so serious, but it also takes a toll. It takes a toll out of those of us who've been at this for a long time. So my first thing is to say, take care of yourself. My second message is follow the science. It's breaking all around us. There are folks who are experimenting in all kinds of different ways. And we need to constantly, every single day, I'm looking for a new idea that might help us, do a better job with our young people. The third is be collaborative. And look, don't allow people to convince you not to talk to those guys. Don't talk to those charter school guys. Don't talk to those public school guys. Don't talk to those folks over there who, are coming from a curriculum where, they're all about, community-based efforts. We have to talk to everybody, and we need to learn from one another and figure out how is it we bring the best of all of that to our efforts.